Welcome to the Yoga Therapy Hour podcast with Amy Wheeler. We're a global community of yoga therapists and related professionals who are sharing our knowledge and experience with one another to make the world a better place for all of us to thrive. On this podcast, we have deep and thought-provoking conversations that we hope will nourish you and make you feel more connected to yourself and to others. Feel free to continue these conversations on our private Facebook group called Yoga Therapy Hour Podcast with Amy Wheeler, and listen at the end of the podcast each week as we'll be giving away a special gift. Remember, we have a mobile app coming out May 2nd, 2022 that tracks mental health and so much more using the foundations of yoga and Ayurveda. Welcome. Today I talked to Janet Lowndes, who has been a psychologist for 25 years, and she focuses on well-being, not diet culture. In fact, she takes a non-diet approach to her psychologist services, which are completely infused with yoga therapy. She studied at the Swami Vivekananda ashram in India and with Lee Blaschke in Australia. She's on the Council of Advisors for Yoga Australia. She's the director of Australia Institute of Yoga Therapy, and she's also the director of Mind Body Well. Now, this conversation could be triggering to almost everyone out there. It could be triggering for those people who have not felt that the yoga community has been inclusive towards them, that there's been some prejudice or some bias against you because of your size or your shape or any function of your body. And it could actually be triggering for those people who've had an unconscious bias against people who have what we might call a body that's not the lithe yoga body, because you are going to have some realizations during this conversation about your prejudice and your bias. And I guess I would just ask you, if that's you, try not to go into the shame spiral. We all have unconscious bias. We all need to have a growth mindset. And as soon as we go into that shame spiral, realizing that, oh my gosh, I've been doing this to people, it's not helpful to kind of luxuriate in that shame and beat yourself up and punish yourself. That's not going to solve it. I think a much better way to do this thing when you realize that maybe you haven't been as inclusive as you thought you were is to go into pranayama, go into meditation, notice yourself and how you're feeling when you have thoughts of judgment, of competitiveness, or whatever comes up for you, assumptions about people because of their body size or shape. Just watch that and try not to go into the shame spiral. Try to be with it. We all have areas that we have privilege and power that we weren't even aware. We all have ways of being in the world that we don't understand are not kind. They are hurtful to people. And the day that we wake up and realize, oh my goodness, I'm doing this, that's the best day of your life. Yoga Sutra 215, right? You realize the suffering that you've created for yourself and others. And then Yoga Sutra 216, you have this opportunity to move into a new way of being. And Janet and I give a lot of examples of how lack of body inclusivity shows up in yoga land, how diet culture shows up in yoga land, and what you can do about it, how you can work this from the inside out, not by going into the shame spiral, but by making an honest commitment to take a good look at yourself and to observe where your judgments and your beliefs and your assumptions come from and how you might be able to work with that. As Janet says at the end of the interview, all of our unconscious biases will show up in session with clients and ultimately hurt the client. So that's a big aha moment, that if you don't want to take a look at this topic that we're looking at is actually going to show up in your sessions, and you're, number one, probably going to lose clients or get some pretty drastic feedback from those clients who are willing to spend the emotional energy to tell you how painful it is that you might be judging them or making comments that are not helpful or assumptions. So just something to think about. I think everyone has potential to be triggered by today's episode, and I hope we can take it as a call to do better, be better, and really shift our perspective from the inside out. I mean, that's really what it eventually boils down to, is inner work, which will then manifest in the outer world, and how we perceive things, how we communicate, how we be in relationship with other people. So it starts with the relationship with yourself, and then it moves into the relationship with others. So I hope you enjoy it. And I know Janet and I had a great time taping it. So let's do it. Welcome, Janet, from Australia, from Melbourne, Australia. Thank you for coming and talking with us today. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks. And thank you for inviting me along. And it's nice to connect across the stratosphere from my side of the planet to yours. It's really nice to be here with you.
Yeah, it's 2:00 in the afternoon for me, and you're the following day. What time is it for you? In the morning?
It's 9 a.m. the day after. So it's always funny. I feel like we're always, a day ahead of a lot of the world in some ways. So 9 a.m. So it's a beautiful time to be starting the day with our conversation.
Well, I have been looking forward to this talk because I respect you and your work so much. And I'm frankly looking to learn something today, because this is an area of personal interest for me, but I can say that I don't have as much experience professionally with this. And maybe that's not a coincidence, right? That the things that we are working on personally, sometimes they're not something that we're kind of an expert in professionally. So let's start with your story. How did you get to become, you're a psychologist, but you're also a yoga therapist, interested in body inclusivity. You're interested in kind of combating the diet culture that we oftentimes see in yoga land, and also, many other things. But can you just start and kind of tell us your story and how you got interested in this niche?
Sure. Well, I was a psychologist first. So often when I meet people and talk about the crossover for me professionally between yoga and psychology, I'm often asked which one came first. So I was a psychologist first. I trained very early as a psychologist, had a very strong savior complex and a desire to save the world. And so I threw myself into all of the most complex areas of mental health I could find in my early career as a psychologist. So I had a really strong desire to help, alongside a very strong work ethic, which I still have, which has its pluses and minuses, as you know. So I threw myself into I worked in the prison system while I was still in my early 20s. I was working in a maximum security men's prison, teaching anger management, which was a really, I learned way more than they did, I'm sure. I worked in a palliative care setting in that stage in the early 90s for people with AIDS. I worked in domestic violence sector. I really threw myself in wherever I could and overworked, and hit the wall and burned out when I turned 30 and ran away to India to study yoga. So I had already been a dedicated yoga student, asana student, I like to say now in reflection, in my 20s. I'm naturally hyperflexive, so I was loving stretching my body and tying it in knots in the most physical styles of yoga I could find in my 20s. And then I had a car accident, and the car rolled on its top, and I had a severe shoulder dislocation and whiplash injury, which started getting me looking at my yoga practice differently. And I was taking a bit more of a therapeutic approach to yoga towards my late 20s. And then, yes, when I turned 30, and hit the wall from psychology and decided I needed to get out. And I left psychology thinking I would never go back, that I was done with the field of psychology, which the field of psychology actually does have a very high attrition rate for young professionals who do exactly what I did, and many don't go back to the profession. So I was fortunate, though, that when I did hit the wall, I came into a small inheritance from my dear old uncle, and that inheritance gave me enough money to go and travel in India for a year. And I landed first up at the Swami Vivekananda ashram at Prashantikatiram outside of Bangalore, and did my first yoga teacher training qualification there. And that was an extraordinary experience for a little girl from rural Victoria in southern Australia to go on my first overseas trip and land myself in the ashram. Was an extreme act of courage, I see now in hindsight.
Did you go by yourself?
Yeah, I did. I remember I got there. You could picture this, right? I'm sure many people listening who've been in traditional ashram settings could picture this. I arrived in Bangalore. I had one night in a hotel room there, and then I was taken out to the ashram the next morning, and I got there just before lunch. So basically got there, was ushered straight into the dining hall, sat on the floor with a tray of food in front of me and no utensils, and thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do this. I don't know what to do. Here I am, like, have I made a mistake? I was I don't know, I can't even describe it now when I remember it. But it was amazing exposure and experience, and I just loved my time there. And I talk about a rich, deep learning experience of another way to live. And the huge advantage for me in having landed there, and it was a deliberate decision about going to that particular ashram, was that they have a very large therapeutic aspect. Shirley Tallis was there at the time. So they have the yoga hospital, they have a large mental health ward. So there were all kinds of psychiatrists and psychologists and mental health professionals there who I would sit with at mealtimes and learn from and have great conversations about how they integrate yoga into their mental health work. And it was in that time that I started to think about that there was a way that I really did want to come back to mental health, but I needed to come back to it differently and with a different understanding of suffering and a different understanding of the human system. And that's really what yoga has provided me and has enabled me to come back to psychology with, I feel like I've entered through a whole other corridor than I had before.
So glad you're mentioning this, because, when you become a yoga therapist, you actually get a completely different lens. It's a different lens than, say, physical therapy or occupational therapy or even psychology. And it's quite different than just you're a psychologist who learned some breathing techniques, but you're still looking at the field through the window of psychology. I think what it sounds like you did was you probably learned Yoga Sutra, you learned some of the ancient texts, and as a result, your whole perspective or the lens through which you view your client and the relationship sounds like it shifted. And I think that is a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. And you know what? It shifted because I viewed myself so differently. So it shifted because it wasn't just, you're right, it wasn't just add a layer of this on top of everything that I think I already know. It was actually like everything from that very first meal in the ashram. I was like, I don't know anything. I don't know how to pick this food up. I don't know how to, talk about beginner's mind, completely like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to let go of a whole lot of things that I thought I knew about myself. And, it was such a beautiful experience being there. I remember some of the teachers that there was a large cohort of students in that yoga teacher training course. From my memory, there was around 50 of us, and I think about 10 of us were people, non-Indian born students. So we'd come from different parts of the world. And it was so interesting because we were the ones like putting our hands up to ask. We wanted the answers to all of the questions. quickly, almost like the download kind of.
Very linear.
Very linear. And can I put my USB stick into your brain, please, wise teacher who's been immersed in this life for their entire life? Can I please put my USB stick into your brain, suck out everything that you have in there and put it into my brain, because I'm only here for a month, and can we get on with this, please? Because I would really like the answers. And, so beautifully, I observed with frustration at first that when I would ask these linear questions, the teachers would often nod and smile and just look into my eyes and be in silence and leave me with the question, which even that is an amazing learning, isn't it? It reminds me of the Rilke poem about learning to live with the unanswered questions as if they are unlocked rooms that you haven't yet found a key for, but it's like trusting that you will live your way to the answers. So the message that I got very quickly there was that I was going to have to feel my way to the answers and experience my way to the answers. It was so different to the paradigm of Western psychology of here's a question, well, here's a research answer, here's a kind of technical response. It was much more, well, you're going to have to feel and experience and find that out yourself. So,
and that doesn't actually happen in a month.
No, it didn't happen in a month. You're absolutely right. It began, and I learned that I was going to have to approach the questions differently. Mm. So I was there for a month, but then traveled around India for the rest of that year. I spent quite a long period of time in Dharamsala in northern India, teaching English to monks in the Dalai Lama's community, which was another exceptional learning for me. And then when I came back from India, of course, I knew that wasn't enough yoga teacher training for me. So I was extremely fortunate from there to find the wonderful Lee Blaschke, who many of your listeners will be aware of, and who I know you know very well, Amy. And Lee, I then enrolled in the course that Lee was coordinating, a 2-year yoga teacher training course, which for me, it was like the time in India was the deep dive immersion that I needed to kind of be blown open a bit. And I did come back from there pretty shell-shocked, realistically, but excited about a different possibility. And then I met Lee and joined the cohort in his course, and that was where the deeper learning really, really happened for me. And the opportunity to learn about yoga in twice a week, every week, integrating this into my life back at home, as opposed to it being just something I did when I was in a different country. So I studied with Lee and a wonderful faculty that he had on board at that time. And I also did some other training with Donna Fahy during that course. So I had some wonderful teachers who really helped me integrate yoga from a very therapeutic lens right from the beginning of my yoga teacher training.
To your point, I believe that every yoga teacher and every yoga therapist needs at some point to go to India and study, because it's such a different experience, and it makes you realize your colonial mindset and the way you view things transactionally. And I'm going to give you this money and you're going to give me that. And you get to watch your ego at work, and watch yourself wanting things happening now, and the impatience and the control. I mean, it, as you said, it just blows you open and makes you question everything you thought you knew. And I think everybody needs to experience that once or more in this life.
I'm so glad I did. I think I was a very analytical, very cognitive, intellectually minded person. And if I hadn't had that deep immersion experience, I think I would have just kept trying to read my way to the answers, Yeah. So you can't do that in that kind of place, right? It's in everything. It's in how you behave how you're challenged by the frustration of the mosquitoes in your room at night, to how you deal with, having to live in a very different way than what you normally do. I think being stripped of your usual comforts actually exposes so many things that we get to hide from with all the comforts and distractions at home.
Absolutely. I always say that when I go to India, I feel like I get scrubbed clean of my samskaras and my vasanas, these habitual patterns that I have. Like I need to have coffee in the morning or chai. Like, well, today that's not happening, Amy. So try not to have a little hissy fit, so it's a beautiful thing. And then, so how did you then take your psychology, your yoga experience into this interest, which is what you specialize in now, which is basically body inclusivity? I think your clinic does some work with eating disorders. Tell us a little bit about how you got there.
Yeah, so I guess it was 22 years ago that I was back in the ashram. So in that time, I guess I came back from India and started the teacher training course. I still wasn't quite ready to re-enter the field of psychology. So I was studying yoga teacher training and working as a barista, learning how to make good coffee, which has served me well my entire life. And by the way, I have also learned that I don't need coffee. I can go without it, but I do really like it. So it is a strong attachment, but I'm glad to know that I can actually live without it. So I came back, wasn't ready to reintegrate yet, was working in a hospitality kind of position and finding my feet again back at home. And then I started getting back into psychology work gradually, kind of part-time. And because I had worked a lot with adolescents, with young people before I left psychology, I sort of re-entered in that area. And just by nature of working with a lot of adolescents, I was seeing a lot of people with body image and eating disorder issues. And I started to really learn from my clients, who have always been my greatest teachers, I think, and really learning about eating disorders. But I had this new lens and this new filter to think about the experiences that people were describing to me through a yogic lens. So what I was really hearing now was about this dislocation, the separation between mind and body. And I was really kind of seeing this kind of that look how powerful this illness and eating disorder, look how powerful this is in the way it creates this fracturing between the mind and body relationship, and that absolute denial of the body's basic needs that a person experiences when they have an eating disorder. So I was working for quite some time directly in very clinical eating disorder field. And then also from there started to learn and recognize that eating disorders occur in all sorts of diverse populations. So they occur across the weight spectrum, across the age spectrum, they occur across different ethnic groups, they occur in people with different sexuality and gender presentations. So eating disorders don't discriminate, they don't just happen to young, white, thin women. That's I think often the stereotype when people think about an eating disorder, but actually eating disorders can affect so many people in so many ways, and that eating disorders are kind of one end of the spectrum, but the whole spectrum is really about our relationship with our bodies and our relationship with eating behaviors. And I would say all of us at different times in our life, and sometimes for significant periods of time, can have complicated relationships with our bodies, with our appearance, with our eating behaviors. So, it's like I've come to understand through yoga about so many forms of suffering. I don't see most of these mental health issues that psychologists work with, I don't see them as an us and them, all or nothing. I think we all exist somewhere along these different continuums, and different life circumstances can move us along those continuums for different reasons. So I now work really broadly with people with food and eating issues, including those more recognized eating disorders. But I've also become very passionate advocate for weight inclusive approaches, and really understanding and recognizing the diversity of presentation of suffering around weight and shape and eating issues, and to try and reach more people who are challenged by these issues and different presentations along that continuum, to try and reach more people and be more inclusive and recognizing of diversity in our work. So the clinic that I director of now has a group of psychologists and dietitians, and we work with people with food and eating issues, eating disorders, all of the different presentations, I guess, that can fall along that continuum. And we're really very proudly and actively inclusive and wanting to share the message that all bodies are good bodies and are welcome in our practice, and that we really want to work with people however they come to us.
So I'm showing on the screen your website, which is mindbodywell.au.
Yeah, that's the good old Australian difference, the AU.
It says Mind Body Well are a team of experienced psychologists and dietitians offering therapies and programs to support your health and well-being. And I think that's very interesting because the focus is on well-being, which is very, that's a yogic thing, right? It's not the pathogenic model, it's the salutogenic model where we're focused on bringing balance to the whole person, not how do we solve this problem that you're having, and we're going to focus on the problem.
Yes.
And is that vision that you had for your clinic, did that come from the yogic perspective that we're going to focus on the whole person and not the problem?
Look, I think so, right? But, interestingly, when people ask me often, well, what parts of what I do is psychology and what is yoga therapy, I don't really know, because it's very hard to once we've integrated so much of our understanding and learnings through yoga, once they've been integrated into our life, it's really hard to identify or separate one from the other. I think that definitely the more inclusive understanding, well, I guess when I think about one of the key learnings for me, I remember kind of light bulbs about a yogic way of viewing the human nature and the human experience was about this idea of the way our system is constantly trying to return to balance, and how we can either assist that or we can kind of, impede that based on different behaviors that we might bring to our lives. So I think this idea of this drive towards balance is, to me, that is so integrative. And when we think about well-being, it is integrating so many different aspects of the self. And I know often I talk to clients about the idea that well-being involves a balanced view of ourselves in the world. It's not just about focusing on one aspect of our experience and making that more important than everything else. So, and one key word that I think is a big problem in our world right now is the word health, which is why we actually kind of avoid using the word health very much, because I think health is such a loaded word now. And in so many ways, because of the kind of diet culture world that we live in, and I'll talk more about what I mean when I use that language, but because of this, the way health has become, has developed such kind of meaning around it, has become has become very kind of commercialized. This idea that health is a unidimensional thing and you either have it or you don't. And for so many people I see, especially with body image, eating disorder, food and eating issues, health becomes circled. The identification around health, the assumption is that that's about thinness and about body size. Whereas in reality, the pursuit of thinness is often something that drives people away from health. It's very possible to become thinner and much less healthy at the same time. So whereas when we focus on well-being, I would say to people, well, that's physical, it's psychological, it's social, it's spiritual, it's, all these different aspects of who we are as a person. And it's looking at how we can work on the balance of some of these things, as opposed to saying, I'm just going to focus on this path, because the reality is that if I strive and have that real grasping in one area of my life, the reality is usually the other areas of my human self will suffer.
And I don't even think it works, honestly, because, I have focused on weight loss for decades without any success, as much as I try, and all the way to I'm eating very few calories and weight still won't come off. But during the pandemic, staying home and really having a regulated life where I get up and have time to do my practice before I run off to, run into work, taking time for meals, getting enough sleep, reducing my stress, weight comes off. magically, and I'm not focused on it, right? I'm just having the time and space to care for myself as I should properly for the first time in several decades, and not focusing on my weight. Finally, it comes off because I'm just looking at all the different areas of my life. I'm able to meditate because I don't have to run out the door at 6:00 a.m., So it's kind of interesting. What do you think of that?
Yeah, well, what I'm thinking as you're describing that is, so imagine if you didn't know what your weight was, like if you had no scales, if you were vision impaired, if your clothing was all very flexible, and like, so if there was no way to estimate or measure the size of your body, imagine if we didn't even think about that. Like, who cares is my response realistically. And I say that respectfully, but who cares whether the number of kilograms on the scales has gone down? I think the answer to that is a lot of people care, but I think they care because they're focusing on the wrong thing. Like, wouldn't it be wonderful if rather than focusing on weight, because are we focusing on weight for health reasons or for appearance reasons, actually? Yeah. And a lot of, I think we do focus on weight because we live in a weight-based culture that where we know there is so much weight discrimination, weight bias, weight stigma, where people make assumptions about people based on body size. And gosh, the yoga world is... this is a very significant problem in the yoga world. I think the assumptions and judgments that are made about people's body sizes. There are some yoga environments, yoga professional environments, where I feel incredibly judged about my body. So I think that's something we've really got to reflect on and take stock of, right? That there's this idea that there's this look about yoga, and that if we don't fit that look, which you know what, most of us don't, right? But the look has become so recognized as a yogi look. And I don't think that's because there's a lot more people in the yoga world who have a particular look. I think it's more because the people who don't are hiding away from a lot of the public yoga places and forums, or they're not going to yoga at all. So many of my clients tell me they won't go to yoga because they feel they're not thin enough. I always find that one of the saddest statements I ever hear, that my clients tell me that they feel... I remember once saying to a client of mine, you don't have to look a certain way to go to a yoga class. And she said so astutely, she said, Janet, that's not what Instagram says. And it's like, yeah, that's right. That's very true. And I know, I think over the last few years, particularly, we are seeing a lot more body diversity. There are a lot of people who are really courageously and, really stepping forward to say, hey, look at all the different presentations of yogis. Like, there is no yoga look, but we've still got a long way to go, right? And there's still, we are swimming in the soup of diet culture.
Define diet culture for us first.
Yeah, right. I wrote down a definition beforehand because I knew it would come to this, and it's one of those concepts I tend to ramble about. So diet culture is the belief that appearance and body shape or size are more important than physical, psychological, and general well-being. Mm. So it's this idea of weight loss as a primary focus because I will look different, I'll look better. So it's an outside-in approach. Yeah. Whereas, yoga really encourages us to go the other way, right? To take an inside-out approach. So, I often just think, imagine if we didn't even know what we weighed. If we didn't have mirrors. I remember my grandmother in her house, she had one mirror in the entire house. It was a little handheld, like a little oval mirror that she would hold in front of her face when she brushed her hair. It's a beautiful memory I have of her. Yeah. That's it. No other mirror, right? And whereas, I don't know, I should count one day, how many mirrors do I see in a day? How many opportunities for this outside-in appraisal of my body do I have? A lot, right? As well as every time I go onto social media, I see the objectification of the body beautiful. Every time I turn on the television, I have it suggested to me that I might like to go on a diet, or there's something wrong that I should be paying a lot of money to someone to supposedly fix about my body. So, diet culture, I think I get incredibly upset when I see diet culture infiltrating the world of yoga. And when I hear yoga teachers and yoga therapists saying things like yoga for weight loss, There is no yoga for weight loss. There is yoga for enhancing our well-being and for helping us focus on health-related behaviors. Great, fantastic. But that's because we're focusing on kind of the inside out, not the outside in. There's no yoga to look better. Well, not traditionally, but actually now, unfortunately, probably quite a lot.
And we have our clients, when they list off their goals, they're saying, I have low back pain, or, and almost always there's the line, I'd like to lose some weight, right? Yeah. So it's almost their expectation too, that we as yoga therapists can possibly help them with that.
Right. Well, body dissatisfaction is pervasive. You can't go out to lunch with a group of friends and sit around a table without people talking about what food they're trying to eliminate from their diet or what new diet fad they're on. And I think it's very trendy to be dissatisfied with your body and to talk about that and to share your, green smoothies on social media. So it's, that it is everywhere. And so it's hard to not be influenced by it. But I'm thinking about, going right back to when we were talking about this, just the whole concept of weight loss. I think the assumption that weight loss equals better, that it equals health is one that we have to be really, really careful of. But also the other thing that we need to keep in mind is that there are so many reasons that a person's body is where it is right now. At the size, at the shape, at the level of mobility or otherwise, wherever we are on those kind of well-being continuums, there's so many things that impact that. And a big one is genetics. Mm-hmm. And many of us will never look like the yogi on the cover of the magazine. So many of us.
Without getting very unhealthy to try to get there.
Right. That's exactly right. And so many people I see with the very low weight, restrictive eating disorders, that is one of the things that is often what contributes to driving people to that place, to adopt very unhealthy behaviors and eating patterns in the pursuit of the idealized body. So I think it's so important that yoga professionals are really thinking about this. How are we contributing to this messaging? Does the way I'm kind of visually selling my yoga contribute to this idea that yoga is about the body beautiful or about the externals? It's tricky though, right? Because the most dominant form of advertising we have now is visual. So if we think about, Instagram, etc., they're visual marketing platforms, but yet you can't actually see yoga.
Right.
You can't see someone in a state of yoga, right?
And, I did this test a few years ago with our yoga therapy program. I made 6 different ads, and 3 of them had body inclusive images. And then 3 of them had more slender looking people. And Janet, it was so frustrating to see 0 clicks, 0 likes, 0 comments on all of the heavier models, and people going crazy over the thinner people in the pictures. And I don't even know how we start to combat this. It's so pervasive with students and teachers and public perspective. It seems insurmountable.
Yeah. Well, look, as someone who, I'm a member of Health at Every Size Australia, the Health at Every Size movement is something that I think is a really helpful place for a lot of health and wellness professionals to learn about how we can help people focus more on health and less on size. So the ideas of Health at Every Size, I'll read these out actually, because I thought we might come to this as well. These principles come from ASDA, which is the Association for Size, Diversity and Health. And these 5 points, they actually come from the fat activist movement and from a group of people who are really saying, hey, my body is legitimate and my body deserves to be respected and cared for, and not just be nice to me and help me lose weight, or not even not just, but not that at all. It's actually, I'm a valuable person just like everybody else, regardless of my body size. These 5 principles of Health at Every Size, the first one is about weight inclusivity. So it's about really looking at being as inclusive as possible in all of our messaging, and not just the social media messaging. Someone told me this recently, that she deliberately chose a yoga studio that used a lot of very diverse body sizes in their promotion and marketing. But as soon as she ended up in the class, all the messages were about, and she said she felt they were very targeted at her because she was the largest bodied person in the class. And the messages were, the teacher kept saying things like, this pose is very good for weight loss. So what does that feel like for someone? And she was, she's like, I'm just coming here to do yoga. Please don't assume I'm here to lose weight. I'm here to do yoga. I'm here to learn how to be in good company with my body, actually. I'm not here to try and change it in an external way. I'm here to find a way to be in good company with it, actually.
To befriend our bodies.
Yeah. The next one is health enhancement. So that's about supporting health practices and health policies and access to health services as opposed to focusing on appearance. The third one is respectful care. And this one's about acknowledging our biases. So I'd really like to come back to that too, because when you said, how do we do this? I think we've actually got to start with the personal as well. So if we can come back to that, that would be great.
Sure.
The next one is about eating for well-being rather than eating for weight loss. So thinking about what nourishes me, right? Thinking about a well-being focus as opposed to diet, in inverted commas, the diet culture, which is all about eating for reducing weight. And the fifth one is about life-enhancing movement. So I'll read this sentence in full that comes from the ASDA website. Support physical activities that allow people of all sizes, abilities, and interests to engage in enjoyable movement to the degree that they choose. If that isn't yoga therapy, I don't know what is, right?
Yeah.
So I think this is a really good place for yoga therapists who might be listening to this thinking, wow, I need to do some work on this. I'd really recommend learning more about how to focus on this more inclusive, respectful, health-focused way of responding to the people that we work with, as opposed to buying into the diet culture messages and contributing to that same weight stigma that people are experiencing in so many other aspects of their life, including healthcare.
Right. So what this is reminding me of is some work that I did with Jennifer Kretsulias. I hope I'm saying her name right. I was really fascinated. I saw her at Sitar one year, and I wanted to know how it is that our gunas impact our perception of our own body. Mm-hmm. And so she and I came up with a Guna Chart. And, what does it look like when your perception is being impacted by, vata? Might be overexercising, isolated, insecurity, anxiety, maybe low self-confidence, need for validation. What does it look like when your perception is being influenced more by pitta, which would be more judgmental and controlling and perfectionism and critical of yourself, non-acceptance, maybe controlling habits? And then what does it look like when your perception is being influenced by more kapha, that you might be self-punishing, negative thinking, loss of hope, depression, disgust, shame, guilt? And the thing that Jennifer taught me while we were going through this exercise, and this kind of blew my mind at the time, is a sattvic body image is confident, compassionate, steady sense of self, just kind of the ability to watch your own thoughts and maybe be unaffected by your expectations, a strong sense of self, contentment, understanding that our bodies go through kind of an ebb and flow and having tolerance for that. And what she taught me was that middle part, the sattva, is completely separate from your actual body size or shape. Mm-hmm. And when she said that, I was like, whoa, wait a minute, let's back up. Let's hear this again. She said, your perception and your acceptance and your befriending of your body, there's no relationship between how it actually looks and what the number on the scale is. Like, you could be any size, any shape, and feel confident, compassionate, notice your thoughts, steady sense of self, strong sense of self, contentment. Like, it doesn't matter what your body looks like. You could be that. And then all the other ones, the kind of parts of us that are impacted by vata, pitta, or kapha imbalance, like your body could be what society is telling us is a perfect body, but you could still be very full of negative thinking and self-punishment and disgust. So that was a really big shift for me, is realizing that those two things are not connected. What else do you think about that, Janet?
Oh, I think it's great. And I really respect Jennifer and her work. And I think the two of you, her mind and your minds together, I can absolutely see how this has come together. And I think it's fantastic. And what I would like to suggest as an addition is that actually when we look at the sattvic layer, it's not about image at all. It's about body relationship. And, in fact, I think the biggest problem with body image is the concept of body image, because what does the word image mean? An image is a visual representation of the self as if from outside. So that's the definition of an image. When we're talking about body image, it's the visual representation of ourselves as if from outside. So that's the problem. It's the objectification of the body. And this focus on appearance over health and well-being, and focusing more on what I think other people think of my body as opposed to my internal experience of my body. So, I've noticed, I'm 51 now, I've noticed that the way I feel in my body is changing, and that I'm not comfortable with some of the things I'm feeling in my body's functionality. And so I'm really starting to focus on that and saying, okay, I want to really think about how I'm going to address that, because this is my home. I want to live as comfortably in this home as I possibly can. And I'm trying to let that be my focus. And you know what? I live in diet culture like everyone else. Sometimes I'm pulled into the appearance focus and I feel uncomfortable about what I think other people might think of my changing body as I age. And I get pulled into that from time to time. And then I try to come back to myself and remember that, hey, this is my home. What is more important is how I feel in my body, and the way I can inhabit my body and the relationship I have with my body. And that's what I'm going to keep bringing myself back to focus on. And then sure, I go out into the world and go into a clothing store like I did last weekend for the first time since pre-COVID, probably went into an actual shop and tried on clothing. And it was really confronting because my body is different than it was 2 years ago. No surprise. A, it's aging, B, global pandemic. So I had to work on that self-compassion of recognizing that, of course, my body has changed. And I'm going to keep trying to bring myself back through my practice to focus on living my life from the inside out, because I want to feel as at home and comfortable in my body as is possible for me in all the realm of biology and genetics and what the possibilities are for my wellness. And I want to focus that, and I want to let that be my focus, as opposed to getting pulled out, because I think really that sattvic layer, exactly, we go beyond image.
Right. It's the relationship with the sensations that we're having. And, today was my first day back at university, first day in 2 years. And I've been very much content with the sensations in my body, the feeling of my organs, the function of my body parts. Like that's where I've been for a couple of years now, which has felt so good. And today I came and had class with a bunch of really young, fit, young women. And I was so confronted with, oh my God, I wonder what they think of me and how I look. Like I just went there, and even my lecture class, I had a big shawl wrapped around me because I thought, I'm feeling judged. I'm feeling like this is the first time they've seen me in person. We've been on Zoom and they're like, oh, that's what her body looks like. Right. And that feeling of getting pulled out to assuming what you think other people are thinking of you. And then, like you said, pulling back in and saying, I'm connected to something deeper in myself. And I'm connected to my sensations. And so I had to come back to my office. I have a little beanbag right there, and lay in my beanbag and feel and put my hands on my own body and feel it expand and contract with each breath, and basically re-embody after a very stressful morning of getting pulled out into this weird space of wondering what everybody was thinking of me.
Yeah, I so appreciate you sharing that, Amy. And I think this is the reality, right? This is the reality of the culture we're in. And I I share a lot of those feelings that you're describing. And, I work, when I see clients, I listen to people talking about just so much body shame and body distress and body hatred. And that has an impact on your thinking about your own body. So many times throughout the day when I'm seeing clients, I have to close the door, stop, sit back, put my hands on my body and just come back to being grateful and thankful for the functionality and the wellness of my body. The fact that this body is enabling me to sit here and be present to other people's suffering. And I'm so grateful for a body and a mind and all the other experiences in my life and the privileges I have that enable me to do this. And I think it's so important to keep coming back to that, because when we get pulled away from that, we can get into that dissatisfaction and grasping and comparison and, all of those things that just are a path to being miserable, really. And it's completely understandable, this weight bias, weight stigma that we're surrounded by. And when I think about the other thing about that beautiful model of yours and Jennifer's minds together, the layer I'd also add to that is our personal constitution is an enormous part, I think, about how we respond to so many things in our life, including our relationship with our bodies. The other layer I would add on to this, because we can be in the most sattvic state possible, right? And imagine if I was in a very, very sattvic state, I walked into a yoga class or I was working with a yoga therapist and the yoga therapist immediately started talking to me about how I could lose weight.
Which happens all the time. I just had someone wanting to transfer to our yoga therapy program because they're in a yoga therapy training, and every single weekend it's about weight and body size and body image and are you thin enough in a training program. So they're like, I'm so triggered every single weekend. I have to switch programs because I can't take it anymore.
Well, thank goodness that person has the resources and is able to reach out and change. Because for so many people, they would either just stop and think, I don't belong in yoga. Oh, that makes me teary just the minute I think of that. I think there's not a place for me here, for my body here. I'm not welcome here. So they would either leave or they would stay and just progressively feel more wrong, more ashamed, more othered, right?
And I think, especially for those people who haven't had this struggle that we're talking about today, they may not realize they're doing it, just like the patriarchy doesn't realize domination, or the All Lives Matter folks don't realize how hurtful that is to Black Lives Matter. I think it's a very similar concept that if you've always been very comfortable in your body, you don't even understand how hurtful some of the comments are.
Yeah. Oh, in my less compassionate moments, which I'm having one right now, I feel like saying to all of those forms of discrimination, how the hell can you still not recognize or not realize? Like, I think this issue, you're absolutely right, Amy, that for a lot of people who have body privilege, and there's so many different forms of body privilege, we must examine the impact of our own privilege on the way we're working with other people. We really, I think again, going back to when you ask what we can do, I think we have to start there. We have to recognize and understand our own privileges, multiple, and also the way our privileges on a personal level intersect with the areas in life where we're experiencing more challenge. So privilege isn't a one or the other thing either. It's we have some areas of privilege and some areas where things are more challenging for us. But I think especially when we're talking about body privilege, and that might be body size, it might be different levels of ability, it might be the way my ethnic presentation is being interpreted through my body by other people. So there are so many forms of privilege, I think, in the way people show up in the world and the way that they didn't earn, that just came with the way their particular presentation is being interpreted in the culture we live in. And we need to recognize what those privileges are, because the privileges bring power, and that power, I think, also brings responsibility. And if we don't recognize that relationship between the privilege, the power, and the responsibility, then we can do harm through the power. Whereas I think we have a responsibility to recognize the privilege and be very careful not to let that power that comes with the privilege cause harm to other people who don't have that same privilege. So, and I think for many people with thin privilege, they assume that weight loss is just an easy thing and that everyone's supposed to be thin and that the reason that we're not thin is something wrong with us. The reality is, hello, biology, genetics, social determinants of health, like so many things. We are diverse creatures that are meant to come in all different shapes and sizes.
Yeah, there's such a prejudice that if you're not thin, you must be doing something wrong.
Ah, yes.
It's just mind-blowing. I could tell you so many stories, although I do have privilege in terms of being a Caucasian woman with blonde hair and blue eyes. Like I know I have a lot of privilege. And simultaneously, as you've been talking about, the things people say and do, it unconsciously it's really painful. I stopped teaching in Los Angeles because of it. I'm like, I don't want to be with these people anymore. I'm so done.
And you know what? Like most people are listening, right? You and I are sitting here where we are what would be called straight-sized women. Like we are women who can go into a clothing store, most clothing stores, and pull something off the rack, put it on, buy it if we like it. And whereas think about then the experience for people in much larger bodies. So we're sharing this still with actually quite a large amount of body privilege. Right. Like we're straight-sized women in a culture that values bodies even smaller than ours. But let's really think about the impact for people who are discriminated against at every turn.
Yeah.
And, I just hope that we can be really thinking about this in yoga about, not doing harm and really thinking about inclusivity and the messaging, and not just inclusivity like let's use some more diverse pictures on my Instagram, but then as soon as somebody in a body other than the ideal comes into my class, I'm immediately giving them messages that their body is too large and they should shrink it through yoga. Like, it's not about just changing something like the images on our social media. This is a deep dive into looking at understanding my own position, my own relationship with my body, my own privilege, my own aspects of power, and what responsibilities come with that. And also really thinking about and getting to know the assumptions I make. We've all learned to be biased against all kinds of different people. We've learned that. It doesn't mean we're bad people. It means we've learned it. But we have to recognize what we've learned and start to really discern, this viveka, this right, not really right understanding, use the discernment to think about, hold on, like notice my beliefs, those deep kind of patterns of what I assume about a person based on something I think I can see, and then really dig into that and really, really recognize how that's impacting my relationship with myself, but also how it's spilling over subtly and not so subtly into my relationships with people through yoga as well.
So that could be another takeaway for everyone listening is notice the comparisons that we're making in our minds, notice the judgments, notice even the competitiveness, notice the assumptions that we make when we see someone of a certain shape or size. One of the things that I always tell people is if I've lost a little weight, people will inevitably, oh my gosh, you're looking so good. And I will straight up say to them, I prefer that you not comment on my weight for larger or smaller, because there's a judgment there that, oh, she lost some weight. Thank God. Let's congratulate her. Right. That doesn't feel good. Mm-hmm. Right. So I think those of us who have different bodies than the normal yoga land diet culture body, which again, we don't want to put them down either. Right. But I think we should feel comfortable saying that I prefer that you not comment on my body. Thank you. So nice to see you. Do you think that's rude?
It's interesting, isn't it, that we get this idea that we shouldn't say things that challenge people, but that's exactly calling out privilege or calling out diet culture. We need to call these things out. We don't want to be all spiritually bypassing and say just be nice to everyone and and the world will just get better by being nice to everyone. No, if we are recognizing privilege and we're recognizing discrimination, we're recognizing weight bias, we need to call it out. But actually what I would say is, can we call it in? Like, can we invite that person into a conversation to say, because I think this is important too, that, you know, sometimes we can call things out just by getting angry and immediately assuming the person has ill intent. Whereas actually, if we can call in, we can point something out and say, hey, would you, I'd really like to share something with you about what that's like for me when you make a weight-based comment. Would you be open to that conversation?
I love that.
Yeah. And to me, that's a call in. It's like, well, let's see, can we have this conversation? If they say no, well, you know, you tried.
Even that, you know, a call in takes a lot of emotional energy to educate someone about how it's feeling. Like, there's a limit to how many times I could do that. I think I could only probably do that for someone I really care about.
Yes.
I've done this several times and I want to stay in relationship with.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So true. And it might be something that on one day you have the emotional capacity to do it, and on another you don't. So that's really true.
But I love this conversation because the people listening can contemplate, oh gosh, I do that. Maybe I could stop doing that so that people don't have to use their emotional energy to educate and combat, you know?
Yeah, great. And I think it's so important, as you said, like that we continue our yogic experience well off the yoga mat or the meditation cushion, that if we're walking along the street and we notice our eyes move to someone and we recognize that our mind has just made an assumption about that person or has told a story about something about that person, then that we stop and check that and think about, wow, okay, where did that come from? What is holding that belief? What is the impact of me continuing to hold that belief on myself and on other people? And what can I do to start to challenge that? Because if I don't challenge that in myself and when I'm out in the world, it will 100% show up when I'm in the consulting room with my clients. And this is, I think, you know, for me, one of the things about being a therapist broadly, psychologist, yoga therapist, any kind, our unexamined privilege and bias can absolutely cause harm to the vulnerable people in our room. So that is a huge part of the work for us, any therapist, to really recognize that.
You know, we don't know what we don't know, right? So someone, a yoga therapist or even a yoga teacher listening to this conversation and hearing this for the first time could think back to many times this has happened, and maybe once first be defensive, but then number two, think, oh, I really do want to look at that. And then number three, feel shame for, oh my God, what have I been doing, right? There's going to be a grief cycle that goes along with us. And then observing it come up again and again and again, because just when you learn about it cognitively, it doesn't really change anything. And then I think that the key is, and this is where the real work comes in, befriending your own body, feeling your own sensations, watching the functions of your body. That's where the shift is going to happen from the inside out, and we will no longer harm clients, right? When we do the work on me, then I can eventually, probably 2 or 3 years of really deep work on befriending my own body, will I be a better yoga teacher or yoga therapist for everyone else out there?
Yeah. So, oh gosh, Amy, we could go on for a long time.
I know we don't have a lot more time, but
I just thought that, look, we need to be prepared to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That's the thing, isn't it? About all the learning that I hope that we have the opportunity to do. We need to be prepared to be uncomfortable when we recognize, wow, like I just judged that person. I just noticed what my mind said. I noticed the thought in my mind or the belief pattern that rose up. Wow, is that really who I want to be? You know, is that really consistent with my values? So we need to be really prepared to be uncomfortable and to sit with that and think about it. And then if we make a decision that this is something that I would like to change, that we deliberately go about learning and finding out more, listening to the lived experience of people in larger bodies, and listening to the lived experience of people with all kinds of diversity, so that we can help develop a new way of thinking about people who we might never have really even recognized that we have those unconscious biases towards.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so being prepared to be uncomfortable is so important, I think, and really being prepared to learn and listen, and absolutely starting with that relationship with ourselves. Because you know what? I think there's this terrible, completely wrong version of me also. I don't want to say me too, because that's an entirely different thing. I don't want to use that language now, but I mean the me also of, it's so common that when someone talks about body dissatisfaction, that people just join in. At the moment, especially, I'm hearing this as people are re-emerging, entering the world after being in isolation periods. And a lot of people are talking about weight gain. And there's this whole contagion around body dissatisfaction that almost ripples across the room that, oh yes, me too, me too, me too. And then it can get into this. There's two ways that can go, right? It can be a very normalizing that, wow, but if the worst thing that happened during a global pandemic to me was that my body shape changed a little bit, then I am incredibly grateful for that. Incredibly grateful that all the things that have happened for people in the suffering through this global pandemic, if the toughest thing for me has been that my body shape has changed a bit, how fortunate am I, right? So it could go in that direction, or it can go down the slippery slope of, everyone being dissatisfied about their bodies and body shame kind of conversation together. So when I find people around me having those conversations, I tend to, remind them that I am so grateful that my body has kept me well to this point during a global pandemic. I'm so grateful for this body. So grateful.
Well, I think that is a beautiful note to end on, this idea of having gratitude for our bodies and all the things that they do for us all day, every day, from breathing to heartbeats to bowel movements to, allowing us to feel loved by a companion, to the joy of movement and dance. I want to end on that. I think really contemplating all the beautiful ways that we can befriend our body is a great way to end today.
Beautiful. Thank you, Amy. It's been lovely sharing the conversation with you.
Thank you. If you're still with us, that's a good sign. That means you made it through. And even if you're feeling a little bit triggered right now, you're willing to take a look at it. I think with all the difficulties that we've had in the past 2 years, from the COVID pandemic to the war that's now happening in Ukraine with Russia, it's just sometimes feels like too much. And I think sometimes we feel we can't handle one more thing. And I think I'd like to just say, if you're still with me after, and you've listened to the whole podcast and you were able to be with it and breathe through it and feel it, I'm really happy, because I feel that this is an area where yoga land and diet culture, there's really a lot of work to do, and it's really not being talked about enough. I think we don't want to look at it. And there's some real stalwarts out there that truly believe that thinness equals health. And we know from yoga and Ayurveda and seeing all the different body constitutions out there that that is simply not true. It's not been true for 5,000 years. So if you're still with me and you're still thinking, yeah, but you shouldn't have extra weight on you because that's going to make you unhealthy, I really advise you to go get some training in yoga and Ayurveda and understand that not every person is supposed to be really, really thin. And that in fact, some people are healthier with extra weight on them. There are other people that are not healthy with extra weight on them, right? There are some people that are very thin and healthy. There are some people that are very thin and actually very unhealthy. So again, these are hard things to digest, because we've been trained, as Janet said, to think that thinness equals health. And I just want to challenge that. And I know it's hard for some people to hear that, but try to ponder it. Try to be with what we've said. If you can stand it, listen to the podcast one more time. If this is really hard for you, probably all the more reason for you to hear it again, or give it a break for a year and then come back a year later and listen to this episode. I have people tell me that they're going back to some of the previous episodes from season 1 And the second time they're listening to those episodes, they're getting a completely different message. They're at a different place. They've learned more and they're picking up on different things. So maybe a year from now, you can jump into this episode again and see if anything's changed for you. See if your perception has changed. Maybe you've been able to befriend your body, right? So we're just planting seeds. And I just want to thank you for listening. I know these are not always easy discussions to have. Thank you so much. And we will see you next week. Our gift to you is to give you a free infographic each week that you listen to the podcast. If you go to the show notes, you'll see a link where you can sign up and find the categories that you're interested in, like mental health or physical health or social justice. And whenever we have an infographic that is in that category, we'll send it to you weekly. Thank you for listening to our show today. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share the episode with a friend or colleague. We're so grateful you're willing to share. Also, you could write us a review on most major platforms that host podcasts. Give us 5 stars if you appreciate the show and tell us what you love so that we can do more of that. Finally, we support several nonprofit organizations through this podcast. See the show notes to understand how you can help. If you'd like to be a guest or a sponsor for this program, contact us at the email welcome@theoptimalstate.com. welcome@theoptimalstate.com. And finally, a special thank you to our team here at Optimal State. We are truly a global family. George Mantuan, one of our executive producers. Adam Satchel, senior media producer and sound engineer from the Philippines. Krishna Panchal, a producer from Canada. Modupe Abdullahi, who does the show notes and is an editor for us from Nigeria. And Peter Morley, who wrote and produced the music for this show, who lives in Australia. Find more about Peter's work at www.zenmusic.biz. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.